Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest Broadcast Revolution event. We are coming live today from our HQ on Portland Place in central London. Today, we're going to be talking about 2025 and the big stories newsrooms are going to be covering. My name is Ashleigh Carroll. I'm the Deputy Head of News here at Broadcast Revolution. Before I joined the company, I spent 12 years at Global Radio, writing and presenting the news on stations like Heart, Capital, and also doing a spot of producing on LBC News. And it's where I met our two guests today. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank
Martin
you
Stanford, award-winning journalist, should I say?
Well, that was a few years ago. Yeah.
25 years at Sky News.
I was indeed, yeah.
And now you present the mid-morning show on LBC News.
I do.
And you're joined on a daily basis by your producer, Chris Golds. And as well as producing Martin's show, you have your own show on a Saturday on LBC News, and you also anchor news bulletins on Hearts.
Yeah, busy.
Radio X?
Sometimes.
Yeah? All the stations on Global?
I think I've pretty much ticked every box on the Global bingo at one point or another.
There you go, you're winning. Well, thank you both for joining us here today. I know you have busy schedules and you've been on air today, you've been producing. So we do really appreciate it. If you do have any questions for our guests today, please pop them in the comment box on the Zoom link and we'll make sure that we are answering, or we're asking them for Chris and Martin. Martin, first of all, could you just tell me a bit more about LBC News for those who might not know the station as well as we do? How does it work and how is it different from its sister station, LBC?
Well, one begat the other in a sense. So Global had a brainwave. The newsroom there, as you know, actually serves all the Global radio stations, or most of them. It's a requirement. Although they're playing music most of the time, they have to have some news content. So ever since all the big brands have come together, like Capital, like Gold, like Smooth, like Heart, like Classic FM, there is a requirement that they have a certain amount of news. So Global had a newsroom anyway, and somebody had a brainwave. We only started five and a bit years ago, back in 2019, that we've got this sort of news gathering function and a limited amount of publishing. Why don't we create a news channel, a radio version of Sky News, or the BBC used to be in 24-hour news, didn't they? Not less so nowadays, and ITV had one as well. And, you know, it's essentially a lot of the news gathering process is already done. Surely this will be a relatively simple change. So hence the thing was born. When I first had conversations, it's interesting the name we ended up with, really, because it was going to be something like Global Radio News, which would have made a sense because that newsroom's job is to gather and then present news for everyone. Somewhat late in the day, it was decided, because much brainier people than I know about brands and everything else, they wanted to ride on the back of the LBC brand by creating this station, the non-stop news station called LBC News. I think that's a bit of a double-edged sword for our reputation, because it's quite different. They're quite different beasts in the sense of LBC's reputation. Of course, they've been doing this for 50 years or more. It's more showbiz, it's more provocative, it's a phone-in station. The hosts are brilliant at triggering that response for people to call in and have an argument. We do none of that. We never put a caller to air. We're not about phone calls. No disrespect to listeners in that sense. We are a news station. And in that sense, too, there's a very clear distinction. We are not, in any sense, politically left, right, centre, or anything. We're absolutely neutral down the middle. Now, LBC is quite well known for its hosts being one way or the other. We do none of that. We sit absolutely, well, at least I hope we do. That's the intention, certainly from my broadcasting, and that marks us out from the much more opinionated, politically nuanced broadcasting elsewhere.
So the types of voices then, perhaps more experts and analysis for LBC News rather than opinion, which is what you would hear more.
Well, political opinion, yes, of course. And I'm not saying we don't do that. Politics is, you know, practically our bread and butter in that sense. And of course, then you're going to cover everything. But we are not, I mean, let's name names. Nick Ferrari is known as that kind of right of centre, Daily Mail, Daily Express, you know, that kind of broadcaster, and he enjoys having a good old Barney, either with somebody who's not right-wing enough or somebody who's on the left and so on and so forth. Come 10 o'clock, James O'Brien's doing the exact opposite, and, you know, trying to prove everybody who's even got the slightest bit of right-wing thinking they're completely mistaken. We don't do any of that. I welcome guests from the political sphere from all walks of life if they've got something sensible to say. And it's my job to try and tease something sensible out of them if I can.
Talk to me about radar figures. I know the next set are coming out this week.
Yep.
I think your latest one showed more than 1 million people are tuning in every week. Incredible. I mean, radar's going from strength to strength. What do you both think it's down to?
Well, it might be what I've just said a bit, actually, that in a world, and certainly social media coverage is all you belong to our club or not club, and everyone else is daft and stupid and da-da-da-da-da. I think people maybe are just exhausted, or sometimes part of their day, part of their week, they're exhausted by all that. Just tell me what's happening. And, don't put too much skin on it one way or the other. So I think that's where we found a voice. A lot of the other broadcasters aren't doing, we are not just a bulletin, so there's an update of all the news that's happening. One of the great loves of radio, in my career, I started off in radio, did 10 years there, went off and did my telly. And I'm back in Radio Thing now, which will be the final chapter of my broadcast story, I'm sure. And the immediacy of radio is really exciting, because we can act faster than anybody. A small pleasure I take is I have the Sky News up in monitors in the booth where we broadcast from. And we can be more adroit. We can get stuff to air much faster than telly can. And funnily enough, maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't. But it's in terms of news as it happens, is what I like to say, is one reason to listen. And it clearly, sufficient numbers of people are finding it a useful service. They don't listen for all that long, 45 minutes max, probably half an hour, certainly.
It's always on in a taxi.
Yeah,
like, always.
I always find
Whenever I get into a London cab, LBC News is on.
Great to hear.
So I feel like during my journey, I am up to date
must
by
be
then.
our core audience.
There we go.
There we are.
I think people are really interested in hearing from experts as well at the moment, people who know what they're talking about. There is absolutely that space for people who've got opinions, but I think with social media these days, we're all seeing it on X, we're all seeing it on Facebook, we're all seeing what people are talking about on Instagram, so everyone's got an opportunity to give their opinion, and obviously LBC does that really well, and has given the ability for people to speak to other experts, with call people like the Prime Minister even, and put your questions to them. So there's absolutely that space on LBC, but I think on LBC News, people love not only listening to experts, but also the variety of people that we hear from as well. We've got our own reporting team who are out covering the stories, getting those on air, getting the immediacy that Martin's talking about, and also so the variety of content as well. We really look for the light and shade. Obviously, the news can be pretty grim at times, but also we look for those sort of fun human interest stories, things that have happened to people. We had that extraordinary story this week of the woman who was offering up pints if one particular football team scored, and I think she ended up giving about 300 pints away because the team scored so much. But it made a great package, it made a great sort of listen now, like get involved.
What a great counterpoint to all this dreadful.
Well, exactly, absolutely. It was an appointment to listen moment, which was lovely. Yeah.
We'll touch upon breaking news in a minute because I think that's a really interesting one. But you've both been at the station since it launched then. How has it changed in the last 5 years?
Well, I think the team, I came from a breaking news, rolling news sort of background, so I was quite familiar with it. I think there was a bit of getting acclimatised to the idea of being on it. Bulletins, by their nature, are a small essay about what's happened of interest in the last hour, 3 hours. When you want a rolling news channel, you want to be on it, and if even look ahead to those diary items, what is going to happen. So you're setting up the listener and what's going to happen. One of the strengths, to Chris's point, about not just people who've done extraordinary things, is we can mix and match. 1 minute we're talking about what Donald Trump has done on the world stage, and then we can zoom right into Brighton pub, or for that matter, Global's team of reporters up and down the country can take us to Scotland, where there's a huge barney going on about, a ship or a ferry that hasn't been built for 10 years, and all that kind of stuff. And they're very good at telling that, OK, it might be quite familiar to an audience in part of Scotland, but you can make that UK friendly. And, local authorities messing up is an abiding interest, isn't it, of who's to blame and things like that. So we can dip into those. And yes, I think there's the mixture we can present. 1 minute I'm trying to get my head round the hardest, pointy-headest economic argument about where the world's economy is going. And the next minute we're diving into something less substantial but much nicer. We don't do a lot for sport, but sporting ambition and things like that, marking those big moments and things like that, the human interest stories of success or failure or frustration. we're all humans. It's good to report on what they're up to.
You must have to be, I mean, you've been in the news for years, industry, not
100 years.
100 years. I mean, not that long, but you know. But you have to be so on it. You know, if you're having a political voice coming on to talk about that big story of the day, and then you're, you know, in the next kind of few minutes, you've got the next guest on.
Yes.
What do you help with those questions, or Chris, or are you just so clued up on it? You're like, right, I'm going to go from this hard-hitting story to this hard-hitting story.
We both know where Google is on the computer.
I think you become an expert in something every day, for literally for a day. So if it's, I don't know, nuclear submarines that we're talking about and how they're being powered, you sort of get your head around that, and then you forget that the next day, and then you're moving on to talk about, I don't know, trade tariffs, for example. I didn't know very much about tariffs up until yesterday, and then we've been learning about them, and then you have to sort of learn the next story. So bit by bit, you have to sort of get your head around the story as quickly as you possibly can, especially on breaking news as well. And I know we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute. I do think that your producer can absolutely support you in that on occasion, trying to put the information in front of your presenter to enable them to do their best work on air. Is absolutely key. But I think that's why my memory's so bad, because I remember one thing for one day and then I forget it for the next.
If you quiz me about what we did on the show last Wednesday, I probably would have no idea. As Chris says, it's like a computer buffer. You load up and then you have to clear all that out and load it with fresh information. But you know, it's I would be the first to admit it's not in-depth documentary type reporting here. We are trying to just say what's happening, why might it have happened, things. So the questions in that sense, if you're curious, you have a sort of insatiable curiosity about things, and you're also just, I would add to that, a sense of why they're saying that, and just a hint of scepticism, or maybe more than a hint, as to why somebody might be offering that view when maybe it's, you know, at odds with the facts, things like that. It gets you through most. I mean, I'll let you in. I don't think I've ever used this lately, but there used to be an old standby question which you could have in your locker for when you're completely stumped. And I'll explain, let me just explain. We are actually, unusually, I don't think I've ever done as complicated a job physically in terms of we're self-op. So we're news jockeys. Disc jockeys always have operated their own soundboard, right? Cued their own music, run the adverts and things like that. In news or speech radio, that's never been done. All those people on the posh stations, like Nick Ferrari, for instance, have a team of about 4 or 5 people running the board, learning things up, telling him what to say, go to the toilet now, all that kind of stuff. We're completely on our own. So having a standby question in your locker just for that moment when your brain's froze is, yes, Minister, but, you know, would more money really make any difference?
Listen out for that.
It works every time.
It applies to almost
everything,
But it's also the classics: who, what, why, where, when.
Exactly.
You know,
Those are your friends.
Those are absolutely your friends whenever you're interviewing anyone about anything. And again, it's all about curiosity. We're all hoping to learn something.
Chris, as well as supporting Martin then, how exactly, just explain a bit more about how then you support the newsroom at Global and those, you know, journalists who are covering Heart, Classic, Capital Bulletins. How do you all work together? Because it is a very, like, collaborative.
Oh, absolutely, yes. We are all helping each other all day, every day. We like to consider our LBC News to be a bit of a backbone of the newsroom. Quite often LBC is covering a story that might not be being covered on Heart or Capital, one of the younger music brand stations, and there might be a story that they want an expert on, a voice on, someone who's been affected by the story. So we might look at getting a guest on that so that they then can take a clip of that for their news bulletins. So we might do a 2 or 3 minute interview with Martin, say it's something that's broken, you know, Gatwick Airport's runway shut down, for example. LBC might just put that in their news bulletin, but they wouldn't necessarily get any guests on that. Whereas we might speak to someone who's affected by that, we might speak to an aviation expert, and we would then put that audio into the system, and one of the other brands would take a clip of that to then use in their news bulletin. So that's quite collaborative in that aspect. Also, some of the interviews on LBC, for example, can be quite combative and can end up being a conversation that they're talking over each other, which is quite difficult to clip. So with LBC News, often the questions aren't quite as, as argumentative, let's put it like that. And so that, again, LBC will love to clip up stuff for their bulletins as well, and Classic. So it's very collaborative, and we work together a lot on that.
So I often tell any contributors we're trying to get on, you know, I mean, okay, we have a modest 1 million listeners or so each week, but come on there, and there's a good chance if you've got something interesting to say, okay, it's not the whole interview, but a good 25 seconds, that punchy 25 seconds
Absolutely.
from expert one, expert two, politician X, Y, or Z. They'll end up going out on everything, from Classic FM right the way through into, I don't know, what's the funkiest, youthiest?
Capital Extra?
Capital Extra. See, I don't know all these. Radio X, that's quite regular. He's quite old, isn't he? But no.
And you're going from 1 million listeners to 20, 30 million.
Well, Global has got about 29.5 million.
Yeah, I think that's
the reach.
Yeah.
Amazing.
We'll tell you again later in the week. We'll send an update.
Find out on Thursday.
Exactly.
Or Thursday, we'll publish the number.
Breaking news then, just talk to me about how it works. What's the process? Is it a case that something comes through on the systems and it goes straight to air? How does it work?
Well, we have as all newsrooms exist on a computer system, and we have a bit of software which we use, which manages all the text information. So that's the news agencies, it's our own journalists, it's our own colleagues in the regions, in Scotland, wherever it might be. This is all piled into a database along with the Press Association. And then, of course, these days you have to I keep my phone on, I keep Twitter, X on, I keep, as many sources as possible. A lot of the news stories are broken, actually, on X these days. Certainly organisations, personalities, bodies, the royal family, they broke news about it's World Cancer Day as we record this. So they sent our best wishes. They sent that not to the Press Association, they sent it on X. So
you seem to be doing that more and more, I've noticed.
A lot of organisations do, and fair bit. I think not just on X, to be fair to them. I haven't checked, but I imagine they post on Instagram. The younger royals do a lot, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
So we have to try and be across that, and it's great that there's lots of supportive, and again, as Chris was saying about the supporting network, so on this main database in front of me, on the screen in front of all of us, people will share that. If they spot an Instagram post, oh, so-and-so's quit, or a footballer's retired or whatever, we often share that in case a colleague hasn't spotted it.
Yeah.
And the wonderful thing here is, which means, as alluded to earlier on, I get quite excited by this. This machine, if something breaks, either the Press Association or a colleague can make it flash in red.
Love it.
So as
that's the adrenaline.
Yeah.
As you are actually reading the headlines, so I've got some scripted headlines which I've put together, and the fourth headline was going to be this, but I can see this in the corner of my eye. I'm reading headline 3 and something flashes down that, and it's a court case where somebody's gone to jail for 26 years. So the fourth headline goes out of my and I ad lib from that one bit of information, and so-and-so has just been done, he's been sentenced to 26 years. Bang, in comes the traffic news. Nobody else except me knows. Well, Chris might know.
Getting very excited there, yeah.
You could not get quicker at reporting information.
I have to say, I think,
Linear radio.
breaking news was always one of the best bits when I was in the newsroom. It was, what we kind of live for, it, like that adrenaline. And then, so, court case, someone's just been jailed for 26 years. Are you then getting a reporter on the phone? If you have a guest lined up, for instance, on another story, would you drop them?
It really depends. I mean, every day is so different, isn't it? And it's just making that call about what are your resources? What resources have you got available? What time have you got available? Who are you able to speak to? What else is going on? What's the order of the news stories as well? Because you don't really want to do too many handbrake turns. You can do them sometimes, but to go from a dark story to a light story without anything else in the middle can be quite difficult. You have to think about sensitivities and how people might respond to those as well. I know it's a difficult question to answer because the news is so different every day. But generally speaking, yes, we would try and get a reporter on as quickly as possible. Either somebody from the newsroom, either one of the newsreaders, or a reporter if we've got somebody available on desk, they're not out on another story, because that's the classic thing, a reporter's going out to cover a story, maybe for tomorrow or something, and the news breaks, we've got to pull them off that and move them on to something else. If it is something like we were talking about with, say, a transport issue, we'd get an aviation expert on if it's Gatwick Airport.
Is that like a black book of of kind of guests that you have? You've had people on before, you know what they can talk about, you know that they're good.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you'll go back to them to get them on for this particular story.
Yeah, I've got a sort of a contacts, but I think every journalist has a little black book of people that they can call on immediately.
Like database.
Yeah, it's a database these days, absolutely.
Keeps it in the dark web, I think.
So yeah, absolutely. And then there's go-to agencies that we go to. We also would go to universities as well to get them to speak about stuff. There's also lots of websites these days where experts put themselves forward for things as well. But social media is probably one of the number one places that we go to. I found so many experts via social media these days. It's a great resource.
I want to ask you both a question. We've had one from our viewers. So Anka from Ready 10 says, which social media platform do you trust the most for breaking news, especially now that X and Facebook executives are openly supporting political leaders?
Right, good question. And I think X, just by sheer number of users and the fact it's become a de facto news agency, then you have to use a sniff of common sense. And I would always report by citing your sources. Sometimes the Press Association will surprise us by saying this is true. If it's unexpected or it feels a little out of the ordinary, I would always cite according to the Press Association. That's until these things are established. If there was a believable line from a source you trust, you can then say, well, what's an example? Keir Starmer has tweeted he's going to retire. I don't know. You would probably suspect that, wouldn't you? Because somebody might have hacked his thing, so hacked his account. But if somebody, a senior Labour Party politician says, actually, I'm going to lie down in front of Heathrow, I'm never going to let them build anything, you can cite that as coming from X. That's the source of it. That's what the MP is claiming to say, or appears to say. So I think you just have to use a little bit of common sense, and being ancient helps with the sort of experience where you can sniff things. Do they feel right?
It is the sniff test, isn't it? Yeah. Does this smell right? Does this seem like it's plausible? Is it possible? Where's it come from? Who's talking about it? I think it's very interesting that the way that some of these social media platforms are going, but I think fundamentally they are just a publishing outlet for individuals still, and that's what you should look at, who's posting and what is it that they're posting.
It's interesting. Blue Sky is interesting, isn't it? because I went and joined it thinking,
but there's
do I want to post it? But
Yeah.
I mean, whenever I check, there's hardly anything much being said, apart from people like the former editor of The Guardian sort of consoling himself about how awful the world is. I mustn't be rude. But you know what I mean? It seems to be quite quiet. In terms of
maybe
breaking news.
6 more months, a year, maybe.
It'll be interesting as to whether that will evolve. I think you'd probably say, wouldn't you, Chris, the showbiz end, more Instagram based, would you say?
Yeah, Instagram, I think that's where
actors will say something, or I'm starting a new project, or I signed up for this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where most people seem to be announcing their sort of birth, marriages, divorces,
Okay.
death.
Yes, and those personal things.
It's the personal things there, but then it's sort of companies posting on X their statements, or even as we said earlier, members of the royal family, politicians, government departments. That's where they're still doing it.
Often police forces will actually give the statement and post it on their X feed.
On their socials, yeah.
Just looking at 2025 then, January started with a bit of a bang, so to
Slow
say.
old month.
I mean, Donald Trump, I mean, we're going to have to talk about him. His inauguration, I mean, even post the inauguration, it's non-stop Trump at the moment. But just talk me through about planning, first of all, for a huge event like this, a huge international event. When do you start? And I think forward planning in general is quite an interesting topic, but we obviously knew when this was going to happen. When did you guys start? Okay, these are the guests we need to get on. This is, who we're looking at. When does that start?
Well, maybe it never starts. No, that's facetious remark.
It's difficult though, because you've got the news agenda still, going on here.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. It's a very difficult moment at which you take a station where we're trying to cover everything that we hope our listeners will find interesting.
Yeah.
And that inevitably is a diet of stories. And then you get a huge story, and obviously we're going to go wall to wall on that. So for the inauguration, we carried the audio from it. This was happening at tea time, our time, wasn't it? But above and beyond that, you're going to book some guests into regular slots. But you're probably, if these things were happening in our time, you want to cover other things too. So look, we've got a big set piece moment. I've done a few things where we're building up to budget day. Well, budget actually is at 12:30. I'm gone by then. But nevertheless, it's quite interesting then to do a little bit of speculation about what might be in the budget, what would be the consequence of that, the rights and wrongs of it.
Are you planning for that already? Or is that too early?
No. So well, let's use that as an example. But we would certainly put some calls in and make sure. In fact, somebody as a newsroom-wide exercise would probably book some people in. So if the budget's on Wednesday, we've got some content for Monday, Tuesday, and it's sprinkled around the output during the day and so on and so forth. So yes, you can do a bit of planning for that, and it's probably the day before, the weeks before we build up. But because you just don't know. So too much planning is a waste because the way that news sod's law works, the moment you've planned to do blitz on that story, 3 other whopping stories will break the night before, the evening before, the morning of, and therefore all that work goes to waste. That said, it would be nice to have a massive planning outfit that can do all these things, but it's a pretty slim operation, so we have to be careful where you put your effort.
Yeah, I think there's more decisions made by editors and people like that who are looking at planning for big set-piece events like that. We are sort of more day-to-day, I think.
It's pretty much in the moment.
In the moment. A little bit of the day before. I mean, I get loads of emails about things that are happening in 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and that's just, for us, a little bit too early. Yeah. We're very much sort of the day before or the day of, which obviously can be difficult as well, because speaking to big names in big businesses, their diaries are booked up, and obviously they're also very popular as well. So sometimes if we don't grab it, we lose it. So that's the difficulty as well.
Then how important is flexibility? If we're offering a voice that would be great, but actually it doesn't work because you're full, you have breaking news. If we could offer them on a different day, that would probably be quite appealing.
Absolutely. Super. You have to be flexible.
We often understand, and feature interviews, I'm afraid it's a cruel fact of life. They may well be able to have 4, 5 or 6 minutes on a quiet day, but they may well get cancelled altogether or postponed, rearranged.
Yeah.
And I hope people understand that, that it could be that this hour is going to be really busy, so why don't we try and rearrange for in a couple of hours' time and cover that story then.
What scope is there for branded voices for those big international set pieces like Trump's inauguration? Is there room for them, or is it more really reporters that you want to hear from?
I think there's space for everyone.
Yeah.
The thing we have to be slightly conscious of is the term branded voice means that I quite understand people will want to come on air and celebrate they're either part of an organisation, or they're speaking on behalf of an organisation, or they're endorsing an organisation. Now, we are regulated just as much as everyone else in broadcasting, so the odd mention of where you come from, or that work has been sponsored or paid for by so-and-so is absolutely fine. But it really does need to be subtly done. And as a rubric, I would say 2 mentions of a branded name in a 4-minute interview is probably fine. Any more than that, and my hackles are starting to go up and my finger is hovering above the off switch.
And I guess what you do, which I think is very fair, is you will introduce that person and you say where they're from, and actually that's a brand mention,
Yes.
And there's often a recap at the end. If you're doing a 5-6 minute interview, you do tend to recap that person as it so. Actually, brand mentions done there, really.
And there's lots of opportunities there, and especially around something like Trump and the inauguration. That's it's such a huge moment in history. And again, to have him back in the White House again, there's so many experts who can comment on that with how it's going to impact their businesses or their industry. There's lots of scope for that. So absolutely, that's a huge possibility.
I'm just going to go to another question. Now, we haven't got a name for this one, but it says, how important is guest versus story? Just to be clear, LBC tends to cover stories or bring in guests that typically wouldn't end up on other stories, but some of the punchier clips from said interviews then may be picked up by Heart, Classic FM, etc. What kind of stories do these include?
What do you think? Guest versus story.
I think that's an interesting one.
It's all about the story.
The story.
You've got to be interesting. You've got to tell the story. Now, if you're going to give me Johnny Wilkinson to talk to me about Six Nations rugby, you can tell I'm not a massive fan, but I enjoy my Six Nations, that's fine. But if he's going to spend the entire interview plugging a brand of toothpaste, I will probably say no. So he might be Johnny Wilkinson, but if he's just an advert, it can't happen. Now, if Johnny Wilkinson is talking about rugby while talking about the fact that a particular beer is giving a bit of money to a charity, we can make that work, can't we? That's a good conversation. He's a great guest. We can talk about things. I mean, it's actually a talking point when I sometimes will feed back or do a bit of training of spokespeople. They do need to know what's happening in the world, all right? And you can't just interview people in isolation. If a rugby player has just, I don't know, broken their shoulder and isn't going to play for the rest of the Six Nations, guest 1, 2 or 3 needs to know that, right? So you can then say, oh, isn't that a shame? And they might not have any view about whether it affects England's chances, but they need to go along with the flow.
Yeah.
So knowing what else is happening on the day, it's probably not a very good example, but knowing what else is happening in the world and being sensitive to that, not just being focused on what they are booked to talk about, helps us all, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think LBC probably occasionally does guest over story, purely based on who the guest is and whatever it is that they're going to talk about and their opinion, because don't forget that LBC's the opinion-led station, whereas LBC News is news.
The Chancellor's been under a lot of focus so far this year. We'll have his spring forecast on the 26th of March.
Yes.
For that type of story, then, what types of voices would you be looking for, and would it be perhaps more expert over case study?
I think so.
Yeah, we tend to go
probably.
Experts.
I think experts. It'll be political. Broadly, it's politicians, opponents, supporters, whatever. It's local people in the centre. We might go around the regions. It's great sometimes to tell, if there's a national story, and I think we do this reasonably well, probably not perfectly, but if there's a national breakthrough in cancer treatment or something, don't tell it from London. Tell it from Birmingham. Tell it from Northern Ireland. We need to try and I think, we need to play to our strengths there. And it's the same essence. It's a medical breakthrough. Now, OK, the research might have been done at a hospital in Norwich. Great, so we're going to go and tell it from Norwich in that case. But there are often times where it may be a bit too easy just to do it from London and a predictable London guest. So we're always on the out for local voices. And I suppose in that sense, it can be a case study. What's the chance they're going to do? Well, it might affect an engineering firm. Well, there's a small engineering firm in every town in the country, isn't there? So let's go find one that isn't just in London, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely go for experts, but I think what our reporters are very good at, as Martin says, is going out and speaking to those people in towns and cities across the country, asking them how they're impacted, and then that sort of becomes a case study. You're speaking to the local lady who owns a pub, or you're speaking to someone who owns a cafe or a restaurant, or somebody who works in a library and hasn't been funded for ages. And you speak to those people and those experts actually become sort of case studies as well in themselves.
So regional diversity is very important then for the station.
Absolutely. We're a national radio station, and as we've got our local teams around the country as well, we've got our local radio stations as well, and local news is very important. Absolutely, we'll try and get as much diversity across the country as possible.
If there's a big political name appearing on LBC, do you also get that guest on LBC News, or is it a case that you get the audio? And how does it work if you both want the same guest?
Well, now there we are. No, it has been the case, I think, that because LBC is the longer established station, and certainly it's been the case that Nick's breakfast programme on LBC, the original LBC station, which is still known as LBC, he has a tradition, a bit like setting the news agenda for the day, or reprising the news agenda of yesterday, and therefore the main opportunity to talk to cabinet or shadow cabinet ministers tends to fall to him. But we put the bid in to anybody really, and it's not, some of those front bench interviews can be a bit predictable because everyone's doing it, whether it's Nick or anyone else is conscious. And Lisa, my colleague who does breakfast, interviews quite a lot of politicians and senior politicians at that. But the breakfast job is, and they're available at breakfast time, but you've got to get their opinions on 3 or 4 things. So you're probably not going to have an extended Barney about just one issue. So there's plenty of other scope for us to visit them. I think we've still got a job of marketing ourselves, actually, to politicians to come and do LBC News without having to worry about the phone-in element of it. I mean, obviously, the set piece, will you come as a Secretary of State for whichever department and talk to the listeners? That's going to be LBC's job forever. That's fine. That's their bag. We don't do that. But will you come and talk about your... I find there's quite, being a little bit of a political nerd, there's some quite interesting stories in those things away from the big policies. Politicians have, they support all sorts of causes or try and get a special private member's bill through. I mean, the one about assisted dying, for instance, started off as a private member's bill. It might have had a couple of hours in the spotlight and disappear. The government decided it was going to be supported, so it's got much bigger. But there's some fascinating causes. Get that MP on, and they're often in constituency mode, which means they're talking for all their constituents. They're not particularly being party political. So you can pick up some quite gems of interesting things just by engaged with people like that.
Whether it be the spring forecast or the autumn budget, will we see you down on College Green at all? Do you like doing an OB or an outside broadcast?
Yeah, like an OB. Yeah. The justification for it is interesting because, I mean, I'm always broadcasting looking ahead to those things. And there is the attendant risk that, as we've said, things happen. And although it looks like the budget coming up at lunchtime is the big story, Sod's Law says that actually something else comes along, and then it can seem a bit foolish. Why is Martin broadcasting from the middle of the green when actually X, Y or Z or some hideous plane crash has happened? It seems incongruous. So there's always a risk of that. But no, I think occasionally it's about offering the listeners the occasional surprise and getting out of the studio and getting down there. And actually, Chris is brilliant at being, I was saying, you're riding the controls most of the time. He is my arm's extension when we do that. And we have to work out a way of communicating by audio, by WhatsApp message and everything else. And he reads my mind half the time.
I think we're in sync now.
We are, just about after 5 years.
That's what you want with a presenter-producer dream team. So when Martin's down on College Green or doing his OBs elsewhere, what do you do? You're back then...
I'm in the studio
HQ,
invariably, just because of the way that the technical setup is that Martin essentially really just has a microphone and a pair of headphones, and so everything that he would ordinarily be doing in the studio is something that I'm doing. So we've got to know exactly what guests we're going to go to next, or what piece of content we're going to play, clips, packages, all the rest of it. So we do have to be in sync in that respect. And I'm in the studio, sort of being Martin's arms for the day.
Apart from the budgets, we get big government announcements. What other economic issues are most appealing for guests? So I'm thinking, monthly inflation, the interest rates, mortgage issues, that type of thing. Are they stories that you would cover?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about what you're feeling in your pocket. Those stories about how much it costs to do the weekly food shop, how much your energy bill is right now. All those stories about cost of living and just how expensive it is right now, and whether Labour are able to change that quickly enough to get the support of the country is a huge question right now, and something we're focusing on almost on a daily basis. There's some cost of living story, I think, almost every day.
Yeah, exactly. And the things like, it feels like dry data, but the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index, right? Anybody, big industry, small industry, they all know. And it's a sentiment. And this was the strange thing about the start of the Labour government, is they were so bloody miserable. And, I do think, I'm not well plugged in to know, but people I trust say, I think they realise they've been a bit of a mess, because it's actually not just about hard data and policies and let's change this law and everything else. It is about the vibe. And if you can exude as a government maybe a bit more Trump-esque vibe, it's interesting that despite people then might feel, well, it's a bit tough, but I tell you what, let's hire somebody else anyway and see if we can make that work. So it's trying to detect that and bring what looks like fairly dry data to life in some way. That's a daily challenge.
Just thinking about some of the big international events taking place, we've got the AI Safety Summit in France next week, CES in Vegas, which happens yearly, and the next COP is going to be in Brazil. Do you send reporters out there?
I wish we sent me.
Oh, no, I thought you loved CES.
We both want to go to CES.
CES in Vegas, I used to go to a few times with Sky News days. Or the Mobile World Congress, I would add to that list, which is a massive thing, still in Barcelona, I think. I'm saying that'll be coming up in a couple of months. But no, we don't have the staff to send specialist reporters there, so we have to find ways of covering it. I mean, mercifully, there are still some publications that do cover it, or bloggers, or whatever else. Or you can pick up the company announcements and see if we can. That sometimes is a little bit of planning. We know that, for instance, I don't know, a big brand like Samsung will be announcing this, that, and the other. Okay, well, let's put the call in and say, well, on that Thursday, can we talk to somebody? Because it'll be the morning after the announcement before, or something like that.
And would you like that person to be at the event, ideally?
That's fine.
Yeah.
I mean,
is it better if they're at these events, or you don't
It
mind?
depends what they're talking about. If they're talking about the event itself, or if they're talking about whatever product it is that they're launching or new service that they're making available, I don't think it necessarily matters where they are.
No, I think one of the strengths of being an audio service is that the picture, the location, is less important. I think if I was back in the telly days booking a guest, you kind of want them at the location, but the location has to be right. I think for radio, as long as the audio content of what they're saying, or maybe they're a good name, you've got the CEO of a company, that helps deliver punch to that story, rather than the fact they're in Brighton or they're in Barcelona. We all prefer to be in Barcelona.
Yes.
Oh, gosh.
Yes, please.
We are getting quite a few questions through, so I'm just going to read through some of these. Of course, if you do want to ask a question for Martin and Chris, please make sure that you pop them into the Zoom chat. This one's also anonymous. What's one thing PR people always get wrong about pitching to LBC News and LBC?
Oh dear, that's so unfair.
It's a really easy one, and I just say too much information. The number of emails that I get would blow your mind every day. Literally hundreds on all sorts of things. So I would say too much information, just put it down into a few lines. The number of emails I get that would take me 5 minutes to read is just too much. And the second thing would also be know your audience and know who you're pitching to. I got a pitch yesterday about offices opening in Amsterdam, and I just thought, well, that's not for me. So, concentrate on who you're sending it to.
Don't overpromise, please. Because if you send us an email at 7:30 saying, I've got CEO of this company who'd love to opine about this, that and the other, and we say, fine, 9:30 any good? Or he's not available today.
Yeah.
Yes, the number of press releases we do get saying...
They're not available today or this week. Okay. Sorry, you wasted the electricity in sending the email in that case. I mean, we do live hand to mouth, so we are very, very much. And in that sense, what can be very successful is we have a shared inbox for... Sometimes, PRs will come to me or come to Chris or come to the radio station or to the global newsroom as a whole. There's all sorts of ways you can send the information. And the really alert public relations or agent type people will react to that story. And if a volcano explodes, then they want... you want the best volcano expert from XYZ University to be available in an hour's time. That would be a really good help if you do that. What I have to smile and see through, I'm afraid, is when a small PR agency or something has got one person running a very small bank, and every day they're an expert on everything. Oh, we've got snakes discovered in forest. Oh, he went on holiday to the forest once. Why did you have him on? Come on, be realistic.
Right, one more other question that's just come through. Paula Jones has asked, look into your crystal ball and tell me what impact AI will have on radio news broadcasting.
No, that's a really, really good question.
Are you using AI in the newsroom?
We are a little bit with things like transcription and cutting up audio at the moment. That's something that Global have built in-house, which is really useful.
Wow.
So it's being able to take an audio and saying, Martin Stanford has spoken to X person about this, and then it will take that audio, give us a full breakdown of exactly what was said, and then we can highlight exactly the clip that we want to take, and it will take the clip for us automatically. So that's something that churns it out very, very quickly and cuts down a lot of work. So that's one way we're using it.
It's a bit of processing, which is quite useful. As for whether I'm replaceable. You don't...
You're not.
No, you're not.
That's right. I only said that, so you both said that. I'm enjoying the love. But it depends what Global want to do with the radio station. If it was a pure, what we back in the day used to call a sort of rip and read news service, so you are literally tipping out the latest headlines from whatever organisation it might be, guided by the Press Association. And we've all seen the sort of smallish newspaper or the small websites which rely an awful lot of journalism, where it's got some algorithm, it just plugs in some local data set. If Global wanted to do that, they could with the technology, and they could even probably, they've got enough samples of my voice, they could make my voice read it out and it would sound relevant. One of the reasons I make mistakes is to sound like I'm a human being. That's my excuse. So I think it'll be some time before the replacement presenter comes along. It could be done. You could probably do it yesterday. But I think one of the things about radio is the intimacy of it. And, you know, we all know it's about one-on-one. There's only one person listening to a radio station. That's the mindset you have in here. And therefore, people either like the way I do stuff or they don't. And that's fine. But I do push it to sometimes, you know, something isn't quite ready or something goes wrong or the jingle machine doesn't work. And you just have to be relaxed enough to say so. Now, that's one of the hazards of really pushing the envelope and trying to be on it the whole time. It means it's not blemish-free, which I think is an asset of making it humans.
And I also think that
it's not a machine.
People want that personality as well. Everyone said that when Apple Music or Spotify came out, no one was going to listen to the radio anymore. But people are listening to the radio because they want to hear voices, they want to hear people, they want to be surprised by the music. And I think it's exactly the same with news.
That's really interesting. Celebrities.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Do you have them on the show? And what are the do's and don'ts when it comes to celebrities?
Well, celebrities endorse things or talk about things, and you know they can do that in a surprising way. And again, as we said earlier, as long as if they're being sponsored by some you know, commercial enterprise, that they're subtle about their relationship with them, so that can work. I think just celebrities, this is not Graham Norton. I wish I was paid his money. So we don't just book a celebrity and yak on about whatever they're doing or, you know, what they think about anything. That's not quite our field. We cover, I mean, I don't cover, but the showbiz story, we have wonderful Charlie Girling and team. So we did something on the music awards, didn't we? And things like that, the Grammys, and we'll talk about the Oscars.
I heard Nick Ferrari talking about Beyonce winning the Grammys. And I was very...
He's a world expert in Beyonce.
Sure.
Did you know
He was
that?
very excited.
No idea, but he sounded very excited on air. Another question we've had come through from Becca Smith from the RSPB. What kind of guests have you had? Oh, sorry. What kind of guests have you not had on the programme that you would love to hear from?
Oh.
Now that's very different. You're trying to prove counterfactual, aren't you? I think, I suppose, when there's a bit of space for some feature type stuff, I have a particular interest in, Chris and I actually share a love of technology. So, and I think that's probably, although maybe I'm a little more geeky than the general public, I think there is an appetite for technology. So I do like to cover tech stories. I think medical stories. And you know, there's a point behind that, not just medicine for its own sake and med tech, which is a vast area, you know, what's going on. I just think it's a nice counterpoint to, let's be honest, a lot of news is what awful things are being done to human beings or awful accidents or disasters happening to human beings. And it's quite nice sometimes to celebrate what the human race is actually achieving. So some kind of breakthrough where some team have come together and they're going to invent, you know, I've done endless interviews about a cure for cancer. They haven't actually got there yet. But, you know, we're striving to do this and we're going to get better at that. And then some engineer has worked out if you put this molecule in here. And they're not complete stories, but they're little steps in the human progress.
Yeah,
I quite like enjoying covering them. I think they're interesting.
I think they're really important, and I would totally agree with you that people who are working on big projects or even small projects that are, you know, advancing things, whether it comes to technology, medicine, just bettering our lives generally, I think they're really important to hear. And so any time that there's an opportunity to speak to people who are working on something special, because we just don't talk, we don't, as we were talking earlier, I think the government's been quite negative about the country since they came to power, and actually there's lots going on in this country that's amazing. We should shout about that more.
And Becca also asked, how can contributors help with that background research around a topic alongside our guests? Would a brief guide to the topic be helpful to help both land the coverage and aid the presenter, for instance?
Yeah. Really good bullet points about stats, figures, detail is really handy. Again, long paragraphs about information, not so useful, but I get that that's brilliant for print, but for us in broadcast, bullet points are so handy, and any press release that comes with those, or any briefing pack that comes with that is so handy.
A 16-page PDF. Very nice. But let me be honest, I may have done 15 other interviews.
Well, I am afraid that is all we have time for today.
Oh, no.
I know. Do you know what? Almost an hour. It doesn't feel like it at all.
Okay.
Yeah. Martin Stanford, Chris Golds, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We really appreciate it. Any minute now, a poll will appear on your screen. Please do take the time just to fill it out. It should only take 2 minutes. They really do help us shape our future events. Our next event in March will be all things political. Martin, I'm sure you'll love to hear more about that one. We'll be talking more about the spring forecast, and we'll keep you posted on the date for that one. But for now, thank you very much for watching.